Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's second half. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Alright guys, in the live stream last week, I talked a little bit about one of the encounters that is in here, and it is really an awesome encounter. It is the last encounter in this, and I absolutely love it, so I hope you guys do as well. Today's first animal interaction. It's not too often one reports seeing or having indications of a cryptid with a normal animal. If they are believed to be real, however, humans cannot be the only things that interact with, and not every animal out there is vulnerable. This was not a report I myself witnessed, but instead one my grandmother told me about. That my aunt later corroborated independently, so I think they are trustworthy. At the time, I'll note, there wasn't much talk of Dogman, as this was about a decade before the infamous song came out. Though there was talk of wolves or werewolf-like monsters in Appalachia for a long time, so my aunt and grandmother just always called it the wolf thing/creature. For a little background on my grandparents, currently Aunt's home is in the backwoods of western Grayson County, Virginia, which to this day is still sparsely populated, outside of one or two large towns on the east side. And back then, it was even less so. Extremely thick forest with hilly terrain in all directions. You have to get on a dirt path and follow it for about a half a mile to get to a gravel-covered side road. And then you follow it for about 30 minutes to reach a very small town just across the North Carolina border. If you go north a short way, you'll find yourself at the Blue Ridge Mountains and the parkway that leads up into Appalachia proper. The forest is mostly low-lying shrubs, up to about 4 feet, with pine and lots of black oak trees making up the canopy. There's a clear stream about 30 yards from the house which has fish quite frequently. This, along with the wild blackberries, tender leaf shrubs, and some apple trees, makes it very lucrative for wildlife. The home itself is an old 2-story house built on an incline of a hill that overlooks it. This was back in the 70s, my aunt believes 1978, as she was finishing high school at the time. My father had graduated from college and was going into the Air Force, so he had already moved out. My grandfather, although he was old enough to retire, liked to remain busy, so he worked his old job as an electrician and power pole technician, just now in an advisory role because he was getting up there in years. He had just gotten the contract down in North Carolina, so he was away from the house for about a week and a half. This left only my 17-year-old aunt and my grandmother at the house. As I said, there was usually wildlife in the area, a lot of it. A typical morning for my grandmother was making breakfast and sitting on her porch watching the deer and rabbit eat at the shrubs. Sometimes she would also see or hear bobcat, fox, and coyote. On one occasion, a mountain lion and her cubs strolled through right past the house. One animal she was very familiar with in particular was a very large black bear, who could be recognized by folks around those parts from the white patch on his chest and the hole in his left ear. My grandmother nicknamed him Captain because he had the habit of sitting on his haunches and reaching up with his paws to pick the apples, a motion that looked like he was shooting. Captain was a very big black bear, but was not very aggressive unless tested. He seemed to have an agreement with my grandmother and grandfather. If they had left him alone, he would leave them alone. He'd just stroll by the house every now and then and have some blackberries on the bushes or some apples that had fallen down, which meant he came by the house often, as he was too big to climb the trees much more, and the fruit trees around the house were low enough so he could reach up and pick his food. My grandfather guesstimated he was somewhere between 500 to 600 pounds, roughly 6 feet, as my grandfather once measured some scratch marks he left on the tree. During the week, my grandmother noticed a fairly sharp decline in the animals nearby. It was the latter part of summer in the wet season, so most of the plants were in full bloom, and the leaves were at their tenderest. Yet she couldn't see the hide nor hair of any rabbit or deer coming to graze. The coyote she had been yapping every night for the past month seemed to vanish. A few neighbors, by neighbors I mean people who lived within 5 miles, who stopped by told her something had taken their dog and their chicken coop had been smashed into. They assumed the mountain lion that lurked about had done it, since it was the only thing that could feasibly take down a large farm dog, as they had seen Captain and only other predator nearby big enough to take down an 80-pound plus farm dog. The day after, in a completely different area, gorging himself on a dead deer. They checked around and couldn't find anything. The next night, my grandmother was woken up by my aunt, who told her she had heard something bang against the outside of the house. Checked around in the morning after and found one of the deer butchered with blood smear on the wall. Judging from the way the gravel was disturbed, the deer had been walking by the house when something ambushed it, and in a struggle it got smacked against the wall. My grandmother, having grown up in these woods, was very familiar with predator kills and their methods. Mountain lions tend to jump on the back and rake their claws across the flanks to hold on and bite the neck. Black bears will usually break the neck or the back with their paws while biting their head. And the rare occasions coyote attack deer, they usually do it by biting down on the inside of the leg, twisting and ripping the muscle and arteries. This kill clearly had the throat ripped out, but there weren't any claw marks to be found, and the bite looked narrower than what a cougar would do. Plus, she could gander there was only one predator from the way the ground had been disturbed, which did not make sense for coyotes as they typically hunted in pairs, since just one alone isn't enough to bring down a full-grown deer. After disposing of the carcass, the next few nights were relatively uneventful, for the fact that several times my aunt or grandmother would be woken in the middle of the night by the sound of something panting outside. Now, in these woods, you could hear a pin drop, if it's close enough, and at some points, where the animal making the panting was directly outside of the wall. One day, my grandmother was picking some berries when she noticed what looked like dog tracks of a very large hound going through the mud flat bordering the nearby stream. Thinking it may be the missing farm dog, who had just maybe run away, she followed the tracks until she heard something loudly growling at her from across the stream. She looked up to see the partially obscured face of what looked like a huge, bulky, brown-colored coyote or wolf standing in the thicket on the other side of the stream. She quickly began to back away, glancing back only to check her footing on the slope that led down to the stream. When she looked back, she saw the very distinctly canine face in much greater detail because the animal had moved out from under the cover. But instead of stepping out of the leaves like she thought it did at first, she soon noticed that it was instead standing up on its hind legs and peering over the shrubs. Now she had seen canines stand upright before. Dogs do it, foxes can do it, coyotes sometimes. It was the size that took her off guard. She had been to that exact same thicket of shrubs just the other day, and her head only just barely reached the top. My grandmother was around 5'3". This thing had its head pitched clear over the shrub with a little bit of extra visibility. And usually when a predator is making no attempt to hide, it's usually because it's trying to intimidate something or someone. My grandmother managed to back away to the hill without turning around, and when she started to get out of sight of the creature, it stepped out of the thicket on its hind legs. It strolled forward in a very uncanny way. She had trouble describing it, but she insisted it never went back down on all fours. Needless to say, she ran to the house in a backpedaled sprint. That night, they heard the panting again, along with a distant howl and scraping sounds. They found the garage door, back door frame, and window frame. All had claw marks on them from something investigating them. The canine creature was seen a few more times across the week by my grandmother and neighbors, usually on or near the area of my family's property. My aunt finally saw it when she saw a pair of fuzzy ears outside of her window. Now, she wasn't startled right off the bat from this, as Captain would usually come to her window a few times before, and she gradually lost the fear of the big bear over the years. But in his case, his ears just barely reached the edge of the window sill, whereas in this case, you could clearly see them and the top of the owner's head. She quickly realized that this was not the bear because of the pointed shape, brown coloring, and the fact it had two fully intact ears. They also started to detect a very pungent smell on the side porch, one time finding what looked like some urine or some other liquid stains on it, suggesting an animal had scent marked it and claimed it the spot. It all came to a head on a Wednesday night when they heard howling in the distance grow closer. My grandmother flipped on the porch light and glimpsed the canine animal quickly sprinting. Lawn on its hind legs again, her sighting confirmed just how big it was. She had seen timber wolves at the zoo up to 150 pounds, and she was certain this was at least a bit more than twice that size. For several hours of that night, they could hear it roaming around the property and pressing against doors like it was trying to find a way in. They glimpsed at several points the shine of yellow eyes peering through the windows, as well as a broad, long-fingered paws being pushed against the glass briefly. This was the day and age before cell phones and 24-hour police service in rural areas, so no one had any means of immediately calling the police. Instead, my grandmother had to wait numerous minutes on a dial line with difficulty trying to call the police station in 2 towns over. She was distracted by my aunt screaming, running into the bedroom to get one of the guns out. She'd been sitting in the living room when she felt a clicking against the glass and saw the wolf thing pressing its face and baring its teeth against the surface of the glass, its claws fully outstretched. Both of them started to try and get the rifles and shotguns out. It was becoming increasingly clear that the creature was trying to get into the house. Anne knew they were in there. They heard it panting through the wall before there was the sound of heavy footprints and a very loud thump, with a flash of fur on the edge of the window. They ran to the innermost room, the pantry locker, and stayed in there with their guns. Now it's not like in the movies when creatures roar, snarl, and hiss constantly, no matter what they're doing, but they did hear commotion outside. My aunt and grandmother had the faintest idea what was going on and did not investigate until the morning after, but they could tell something was antagonizing something as occasional grunts, barks, and rumbles were audible through the blackness for about a minute and gradually moving off. They found no bodies, but there had clearly been a ferocious altercation. The ground was ripped up in multiple spots. The wall had a dent in it, and there was some oxidized blood traces on the grass and dirt. My grandmother also found a trail where something had charged through the shrubs and recovered several vague dog prints as well as wider tracks moving in the same direction. The animals all seemed to come back by the end of the week, and the howls stopped. When my grandfather came back home, he, my aunt, and some neighbors surveyed the area and made sure they could not find that wolf creature. Evidently, the neighbors had also heard the howls around their property at night. That stopped recently as well. They couldn't find it despite surveying the whole property, though they did find what looked like a track leading out of the property and running off into the mountains. Several days later, my grandmother saw Captain again, marking his territory by rubbing up against a tree in their yard and scratching the bark. He had several cuts across his muzzle. He was missing patches of fur, had some healed bite wounds on his arms, and a hole in his ear. Torn open to the point he was missing half the ear now. But other than that, and a slight limp that went away in time, he was fine. My aunt joked that he looked rather proud of himself. When he was told about the urine-like smell on the doorstep when the wolf creature was running amok, my grandfather speculated it was trying to claim its territory. Usually black bears are relatively docile, but evidently Captain took an issue to this newcomer imposing on his space and became aggressive. So what my grandmother and aunt heard that night, the bear was charging while it was distracted and engaging the intruder. While the wolf-looking creature was taller, it was skinnier and less massive, and apparently in the confrontation and threat displays that likely followed, sheer bulk won out. Apparently it decided it was not worth claiming this spot if it meant having to square off with a 1/4 ton of claws and teeth for it. Captain had run off the intruder and protected his territory and coincidentally helped my family. As a thank you, and so he could recover his strength quicker, my grandmother trimmed the apple trees to down all the fruit and let the bear enjoy himself without feeding him directly. Don't want to associate humans with food. Winter would be in a few months and she wanted him fattened up so he could stick around for the next year just in case. As she put it, the forest will always have a boss, and it's better to have one who's not interested in eating you. Decades have gone by, and while both my grandparents and Captain have passed, that Dogman creature never returned. There's been about 3 black bear who've moved into Captain's place since, and each has grown about as big as he was. Thankfully, that seems to have been enough to ward off any large canines. Man, I love that story. I really do. It's just something about it. Just you feel like a joy, hearing about Captain whooping some Dogman tail. Man, what an experience that must have been. On to today's second animal interaction. My name's Mike. I'm 63 years old, recently retired from a soul-sucking IT analyst job for a major bank in Charlotte, North Carolina. where I was just a cog in the big money machine that facilitated the movement of money across the globe. East to west, you can call it dollars, euros, yens, or ruples. It's always the same. Money flows like a river. It has currents and eddies, ups and downs, diverted to and fro, damned and damned. You see the trillions of monetary units flowing across the world and wonder if only a small percentage of it were diverted to help people out, stamp out war, feed the hungry, health care for all who needs it. But that's not the game, and I had to leave it behind. I'm not here to comment on the vagaries of modern society. I'll leave that to the poets, priests, and politicians who are paid for their words and lies. So I retired to the country, not off the grid, but close enough to see the edge. Close enough that I can see the footsteps of those who came before, the early pioneers and settlers, the wagon tracks and homesteads of the long-dead chapter in American history. A time of exploration and discovery, and a time where one man was deemed only a percentage of what makes up another man by law. A time where cotton and tobacco were the currency of the world, and they truly flowed on rivers. My best friend forever, Galen Chauncey, and I love to explore the remnants of this bygone era before the march of modern society wipes them out forever. Luckily, I live in the largest and least populated county in Virginia, so there are many abandoned homesteads and graveyards from the late 1700s through the Civil War and subsequent migration out of the war-torn South. Galen always has her voice recorder and camera at the ready. I usually man the video camera. She has gotten many EVPs and filmed countless orbs and ghostly manifestations. I guess you could call it that. She truly puts the ghost hunter shows to shame. In our investigations, her one rule is to run if she says run and no questions. A rule I obey maybe 75% of the time. Maybe 10 miles from my house, up on a hill, sits a large mid-1800s mansion, made inaccessible by the lack of a driveway and a tangled thicket of brush and briar. There were vultures nesting on the chimney. Talk about spooky. Of course, Galen was itching to investigate. I would always make up an excuse on not to go up there. Either it was too cold, too wet, too damn scary, man. But where most men would fear to tread, Galen goes, "Come on." And she says it gleefully, which makes it all the much more unnerving. So giving in to the inevitable, we go out to investigate. I park my truck below the house about 50 yards away. It's a beautiful autumn day in the Appalachians, so I could not weasel my way out of it this time, and I had to admit I was curious as hell to see what was up there. With the smell of sassafras and chimney smoke in the air, we started to make our way through the brush and trees. I was struck by all the debris all around. I found a rustled-up machete, water bottles, and even an old smashed video camera. But the shoes, tennis shoes, and old moss-covered boots littered the ground. We finally hacked our way to the front porch. It was magnificent in its decay. The ornate banisters, the eaves crafted in a day where craftsmanship ruled and deadlines were an afterthought. The inside was bone dry for the most part. There were many artifacts and clothing from the previous tenants, and more shoes. There was even a TV from the 60s in one of the rooms, which seemed to be the last time the house was occupied. We proceeded to explore the mansion room to room. We separated, Galen with her voice recorder and camera, me with a video camera. I went out back and found an old well with a smet all around it. I looked over the edge down into the well as best as I could. I thought I saw a pair of golden eyes, but it was hard to see, so I adjusted the viewer on the camera and held my hand over the hole. In the viewer, I could clearly see a pair of dark golden eyes glowing in the darkness of the hole. I was just about to cry out to Galen when I heard her shout, "Mike, get up here, quick!" She was at the back of the house in what looked like the kitchen. Off the side was another leaf and debris covered room with a hatched door in the middle. It looked to be the door of the root cellar, so we made our way to the door. It reeked with the stench of death in the room, and it got stronger the closer we got. Galen goes, "Look!" At the bottom of the steps was a carcass of a huge deer, lying partially in the dim light of the small amount of sun that made its way in, and partially in the darkness of the root cellar. I was kind of relieved. I thought to myself, that explains the blood and the stench of death. I was just beginning to tell her I'm not going down there when the carcass suddenly and quickly was dragged out of the light into the darkness. One of us screamed, and I'm pretty sure it was me. Galen did not have to tell me to run this time. We both bolted out of the room toward the front door. I let her go first out the front door, down these steps into the brush. If we were going to be eaten, best it was me first. But I had the keys to the truck. The things you think of when you're about to be eaten. I got about 20 feet into the brush and looked back, and what I saw shook me to the core. In the darkness of the doorway, I saw 2 red eyes glowing like brake lights at a semi-truck in the night. I froze in my tracks. I was able to make out a dark shape in the darkness of the doorway. It looked like a huge dog or wolf, Bible black with huge pointed ears on the top of its head. It was then the eyes. They went into a malevolent squint, and then the mother effer smiled at me. I could see the pure white teeth, the canines on either side, and the front teeth were not rounded like other dogs, but went straight across. It had a flat, piggy snout, and I could see its nostrils flare as it lifted its head to get my scent. It then lowered its head and laser-eyed into mine, right down to my soul. The eyes glowed so red that I initially felt that it had me, that I was his for the taking. I couldn't move, and I dropped to my knees, hanging onto the tree. At this time, Galen yelled, "Mike!" with a hint of exasperation. That broke the hold it had on me, and I bolted. The door lock remote on my key fob so Galen could get into the truck. I got in, fired the ignition, dropped it into gear, and spurred a rooster tail of dirt and gravel 20 feet into the air. "What was that?" Galen said. I replied, "I don't know. Not sure myself what I had just seen." "Maybe it was a bobcat," said Galen. "You're probably right," I replied, relieved in the fact that she had not seen what I had, that she had not looked into the eyes of the devil as I had, that he did not know who she was, that she wasn't on his list. That's what I somehow felt was true. As we were driving away, Galen says, "Do you think we could go back sometime and get that TV for me, baby?" I looked back in my rearview mirror at the house fading in the distance with the vultures flying about, wondering what happened to their meal, and said, "We'll see," knowing full well I'd never go back there, not even travel on that road again. That was in the fall of 2016. Galen has since moved an hour away, and due to life, we don't get out as often. But all through the winter of 2016 into 2017, my encounter was in the back of my mind. Would he hunt me down? Was he scoping me out, waiting for the right time to take me? I live in a single-wide trailer next to a lake with my 2 rescued cats, Little Boy and Adam. I let them out at daybreak and bring them in at night. Little Boy likes to get on top of the roof, as do a family of raccoons. Sometimes at night, the raccoons will run across my roof, freaking me out. I hope it's the raccoons, anyway. There have been a couple of times I have smelled the stench. It's the country and things die out in the woods, but I don't go off my porch at night. Later that spring of 2017, maybe May, I was driving in a country on Graves Bridge Road along the Pig River. It is a gravel road, and I decided to park and get out and look at the fish swooning themselves in the primeval-looking shallows of the swampy S-curves of the Pig. It was then I thought I heard a baby cry. I heard it again. It sounded like a demonic baby cry, but I had to check it out. I have to admit I was scared when I made my way to the sound. I drew my pistol. It's a Taurus Judge that shoots either 5.45 caliber Colt cartridges or 410 shot. I usually keep it loaded with 4 shots and 1 bullet. I made my way through the scrub, and what I saw was heartbreaking. It was a dead mother mountain lion with its cub lying beside her. I walked up to the scrawny cub. It was growling at me pitifully. It tried to run, but it collapsed after only a few feet. The mother was ripped to shreds. Whatever had done this to them, she had fought mightily. About 10 feet over was even a sadder sight. It was another cub, with its midsection completely eaten out up to the spine. I assumed this was the brother to what I later found out was his sister cub. She was missing an ear, her eye was closed and covered in dry blood. I went back to my truck and got a Dollar General basket and a jean jacket I had in the back. I put my arms into the jacket and used it to lift her up and put her into the basket. She didn't fight, resigned to her fate. I kept telling her, you'll be fine, baby girl. When I brought her home, my cats freaked out. Adam went into the back, but little boy was right there, curious as usual. She was bigger than them, but was in such a bad way she was no threat. I got a warm cloth and cleaned her eye. It opened, and she had not lost it, as she had lost her ear. She had 4 horizontal gashes on either side of her flanks. They weren't too deep, and they had scabbed up. I had some cat antibiotics, so I filled a syringe and squirted it in her mouth. The weird part was she never fought me. I found that odd. Up some warm milk and filled the syringe, and she drank that eagerly. I fixed up a box with some towels and put her in the back room. Little boy, who was more empathy than most people, insisted on staying by the box. Adam could give 2 craps. I ended up cutting one side of the box so she could come and go. Little boy would curl up with her. I went ahead and named her Jet. Because of the gashes, they had healed, but the scars made her look aerodynamic and fast. She soon started eating Fancy Feast by the box. I ended up getting Alpo dog food, and she ate heartily. I knew I should have called animal control, but I was afraid they'd put her down with the shape she was in. After about a week, she was up and about, little boy by her side. It was as if she had adopted him as her own brother. They would roll and play fight, and I could even pet her, but there was a look in her eyes, a lack of joy, as if she was on a mission. I wish I could say that she became my pet, that we were a family, but about 4 weeks, she was playing with little boy in the front yard and just disappeared. I knew it was inevitable that she would leave. She had a mission of revenge. Somehow I knew this to be true. Fast forward to the summer of 2019, I had almost completely forgotten about Jet and that wolf creature. What I had reconciled in my mind with what the red-eyed devil had been. I was out one day riding around looking for the Nazi house, a house that me and Galen had found with swastikas painted all over the walls. It was a very foreboding house. Anyway, I saw an old farmhouse about 100 yards off the road through a pasture. I parked the truck and made my trek through the tall grass to the farmhouse. Typical abandoned farmhouse for this area, with barns toward the back of the property next to the tree line. The house was filled with dust and trash, no artifacts to be known. The barn was further back with a pond next to it, so I decided to check that out. I walked up to it and through the door when I saw it. The wolf creature. It was crouched down on its haunches with a small deer in its hands. It had hands with elongated fingers with claws on the end. It was feasting on the poor baby deer like a man would an ear of corn. Then it stood up and smiled at me. My God, it must have been 7 feet tall. It was holding the deer in one hand like a basketball. I say this because the beast looked like a basketball player, thin at the waist with a large developed chest. It was a male because I could see its junk. The legs weren't like a man, but like a dog's, only longer. I knew it was a Dogman at this point. I grabbed my pistol and turned to run. Simultaneously, I could hear it take off behind me. 30-foot head start, but I knew I hadn't much time. I started firing behind me. I heard it yelp when a slug hit it, but I knew the 410 was not going to do much but piss it off. I fired the last shot. Just as I reached the front side of the farmhouse, I knew I was a goner. That's when I saw a flash of movement to my left from off the porch. I heard an incredible collision of sound and growling. I turned and fell back. It was Jet. The one-eared bitch had jumped on its back and had a death bite on the back of its neck. I could see her powerful muscles bulging and heaving as she dug in on that black bastard. It turned its head to try to get Jet, but she just adjusted her bite and grabbed onto the front of its neck. It roared with a strangled howl. She glanced at me. The look on her face was pure revenge. I knew she was getting even for her mother and brother. "Get that mother effer, Jet," I yelled. Suddenly, the Dogman was able to grab Jet's left paw with its mouth, and she lost her grip on its neck. I took this as a sign to get the heck out of there and took off toward my truck. I heard the battle just echoing through the small valley. I got to the truck and turned just in time to see the Dogman running back around the barn into the tree line. Jet limped on 3 legs back onto the porch. I could see her breathing mightily as she licked her paw. She looked up at me and then to her left. She jumped off the porch and ran as fast as she was able to the edge of the woods. I was curious what she was doing. That's when I saw why. She had 2 cubs waiting in the tall grass. The 3 of them started loving each other. She gave me one more glance and dissolved into the darkness of the tree line like ghosts in the woods. My heart leapt with emotion. I knew the battle wasn't over, though. There in the deep woods, there is a hidden war going on. If you are ever in the woods and come across the stench of death, turn and walk away. I count my lucky stars. I've looked into the eyes of pure evil and survived. I showed love and mercy to one of my fellow creatures of God, and it was returned to me tenfold. I feel I learned this from little boy. Adam could give a crap, though. Well, there you have it, folks. Today's bonus. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I told you that last experience with Jet. Something about that experience and I don't know how we got on the topic of mountain lions. Yes, I do, actually. Someone asked if a Dogman could take a mountain lion. And I said, well, I heard one experience that they have, a few that they have, and one that they didn't. And that was it. Jet. All right, guys, thank you for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps the channel growing and going. And honestly, what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences, theories, and experiences judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.